All right, listen up, people. I talked about this on stream a little while ago. Don't think I covered it with enough energy because it's important to me. Look, inside Biden's meeting with civil rights leaders, this is an article from The Intercept. Biden had a big old Zoom call with a bunch of civil rights organizers, which is good. I'm glad. I mean, Trump wouldn't do that. But here's the thing, folks, okay? Biden was not the progressive nominee. Bernie was. Which means we're fighting uphill as progressives to try to extract concessions from Biden. Now, some concessions have been extracted by the Bernie Sanders administration, even if they may end up only being vocal concessions rather than actual action. It is something because, hey, and I need to remind all of you, the more Biden disappoints Democrats, the more we get to pull on their heartstrings. That's very important. So we're having this conversation here, and these are excerpts from a call that went on for, as you can see here, an hour and 40 minutes. So we can't go over the whole thing. There are some excerpts I want to focus on, though. First, we'll go with this one. Listen up.
One of the things I'd be concerned about.
That's Biden.
Just as was pointed out to me that you wanted me to be concerned, Derek, I think it was you said it, about, dealing with Vilsack as in terms of agriculture. Well, first of all, you can learn more about Vilsack's record, but my point is this. I don't think we should make that a big issue going into before January 5th when the election takes place down in Georgia. But I also don't think we should get too far ahead of ourselves on dealing with police reform in that, because they've already labeled us as being defund the police. Anything we put forward in terms of the organizational structure to change policing, which I promise you will occur, promise you. Just think to yourself and give me advice whether we should do that before January 5th, because that's how they beat the living hell out of us across the country, saying that we're talking about defunding the police.
Okay. So this is going to be a really common talking point with moderate Democrats. We got to shut this shit down as soon as we can, okay, people? We need to shut this shit down, okay? Hold up, and please, God, listen to me, and remember this, and engrave these words into your fucking heart, okay? Engrave them into your heart, so that when you hear Democrats say this shit again in the future, you have a response to it, okay? Defund the police came from activists, not politicians. There are a lot of moderate Democrats who are trying to blame progressive Democrats for dragging the entire Overton window to the left and therefore making all of you targets from Republicans. First off, the Democrats in general made the decision to support BLM. Now, I agree with that decision. I'm glad they did. But you all made that decision. And BLM was saying, or at least parts of it, were saying defund the police. All of you branded yourself with that the moment you decided to involve yourselves in a civil rights movement, okay? So you really had two choices. You could be anti-BLM or pro-BLM. The Republicans are anti-BLM. You chose pro-BLM. You can't really be neutral on an issue like this. Certainly not the Democratic Party, since it comprises most of the votes of POC in this country. So you chose to be pro-BLM, and this is the consequence of that. But don't use that to blame progressives in the House. No politicians were running on defund the police. Defund the police was a slogan or a policy suggestion or whatever they want to call it that was being thrown out largely by activists, but it was going to be used to brand all of you. Here's the thing, and be clear about this, okay? No matter what the progressives did, no matter what they did, Republicans, Cory Bush did. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be hyperbolic. A few of them did. Those that did tended to win their seats, though. The real question here is, to what extent did the defund the police narrative harm moderate Democrats in moderate districts? And there's a legitimate argument to be had there, but there are Democrats trying to make it seem as though it was the progressives in the Democrat Party who thrust them into that position. That is not true. Even if every single Democrat politician, every single one of them, refrained from saying defund the police, even if they never touched on that, Republicans would have latched onto it just as much, every bit as much. You think Republicans care about whether or not something is true before making an issue out of it? They're calling all of you socialists anyway, even though Biden beat out Trump. It was pathetic watching Biden in the presidential debates have to remind Trump that he beat Bernie. Like, it really makes me wonder how much of a relationship there is between the characteristics which lead you to winning the primary and those which lead to you winning the actual presidential election. Because I don't know, I genuinely don't know if the average Republican could tell a difference between Biden and Bernie, or between Kamala Harris and Bernie. I genuinely don't know. And with that in mind, like, to what extent can we blame any progressive Democrats for rhetoric being used against the moderates, if it's all boiling down to the exact same talking points, no matter what spurs them? I just want to be clear about this, because I really do not want progressives to feel as though they're on the hook for the poor performance in this prior election, okay?
We're not. We're talking about holding them accountable. We're talking about giving them money to do the right things. We're talking about putting more psychologists and psychiatrists on the telephones when the 911 calls through. We're talking about spending money to enable them to do their jobs better, not more, with more force, with less force and more understanding. But that's, I just raise it with you to think about. How much do we push between now and January 5th? We need those 2 seats about police reform, but I guarantee you there will be a full-blown commission. I guarantee you it's a major, major, major element.
I worry about that narrative. I worry more about this.
And so there's some things that I'm going to be able to do by executive order. I'm not going to hesitate to do it. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do what used to, Vanita, you probably used to get angry with me during the debates, when you'd have some of the people you were supporting say, on day one, I'm going to executive order to do this. Not within the constitutional authority. I am not going to violate the Constitution. Executive authority that my progressive friends talk about is way beyond the bounds. And as one of you said, maybe you, Reverend Al, whether it's far left or far right, there is a Constitution.
What is he referring to here? He keeps referring to the Constitution. What is he referring to here? Keep in mind, guys, even if we get those 2 seats in the Senate, in all likelihood, Congress is going to remain a gridlock. Basically, the only things we've been able to get done over the past 4 years has been through executive actions. And he did promise a lot of day one shit. Whether we like it or not, executive action seems to be the only way this government can function right now. So what constitutional violations is he gesturing at? And why does he sound angry at progressives for asking he do something?
It's our only hope. Our only hope. And the way to deal with it is where I have executive authority, I will use it to undo every single damn thing this guy has done by executive authority. But I'm not going to exercise executive authority where it's questioned, where I can come along and say, I can do away with assault weapons. There's no executive authority to do away with that.
Is anyone
and
asking
no one's
for
fought
that?
harder to get rid of assault weapons than me. Me. But you can't do it by executive order. If you do that, next guy comes along and says, well, guess what? By executive order, I'm going to say everybody can own machine guns again.
So what he's doing here is he's playing an optics game, right? He wants to hold off. So what he claims is he wants to hold off on all the radical stuff before the 5th, because that's when the runoff elections in Georgia take place, which makes sense, right? And I agree with that, by the way. I mean, anything to get those 2 Senate seats. The issue is, it seems like he's trying to posture his opposition against the progressives in his party. That seems to be the way he's playing the optics game. There are better ways to do it than that. He's like desperate to look moderate. But I still don't see any data on the argument that moderation is what won Biden this election. He won by 7 million votes. Were those 7 million really because he was more moderate than Bernie? There are a lot of other conceivable explanations. I mean, if you actually look at who Democrats' first preference for the presidential candidacy was. I remember seeing this. Does anyone have this data offhand? It was something like 30% of Democratic voters wanted Bernie Sanders first. And then it was like 9% Warren or something, 13% Biden, like 6% Buttigieg. The largest block was for Bernie. There were a lot of Bernie-crats this time around, and many of them, resignedly, voted for Biden after the fact because they still prefer him to Trump. And I agree with that. I'm one of those voters. First preference, Bernie. Then we go with Biden if we have to. I agree with that. Majority said their vote was against Trump, not for Biden. That's the key distinction here. If the majority of the Democratic Party is voting against Trump and not for Biden, the things Biden's proposing, his individual merits as a politician, aren't what's energizing people to go out. People didn't go out there and vote this year because Biden was that exciting. They voted because a second Trump term was terrifying. So with that in mind, is Biden's moderation really the keystone to securing victory in these two Senate seats? Or in my opinion, it would be aggressively utilizing a grassroots network of progressives to try to bring out as many people as possible in Georgia, Stacey Abrams style. I don't know. Going after the progressives here feels like it has the possibility of leading to as many people not voting out of apathy as bringing new people in to vote. I gotta tell you, when I watch stuff like this, I'm not exactly motivated to go out there and vote for Biden. I already did, but if I lived in Georgia, it wouldn't be motivating me to do so. I don't live in Georgia, and I would vote for Biden either way, but I'm not every person. We need that energy. Biden doing this shit shouldn't be surprising. I'm not even remotely surprised. I think the worst audio, though, isn't in one of the listed segments here. It's from this bit.
Community are getting a little anxious.
This is from the same call, by the way. It just doesn't have the video. Not that the video is high enough resolution to be noticeable.
Because they are not seeing enough of the progress they thought they would have seen at this point. Let's not disappoint.
This is not Biden.
Them, and let's not get to a place where voters in Georgia begin to second guess.
Okay, let me respond. I've got to go. Let me respond. There's a lot to respond to here. Let's get something straight. You shouldn't be disappointed. What I've done so far is more than anybody else has done this far. Okay? Number one. Number two, I mean what I say when I say it. I mean what I say when I say it. I'm the only person who's ever run on 3 platforms that I was told could not possibly win the election, and I never ceased from it. One was on restoring the soul of this country because of what I saw happen in Charlottesville. That was it. No one else was talking about it. The words of presidents matter. Nobody else, no progressive, was talking about it.
No progressive was talking about Charlottesville. He unironically said that to a group of progressives. No progressive was talking about Charlottesville. I don't even know what to say in that. Listen how fucking petulant and angry and entitled he sounds in this. Like, he's not actually making any points. Listen up. No, listen. Nobody ever said you could ever win by promising to restore the soul of the election or whatever. What the fuck is he talking about? He comes off here like somebody who's angry that he's being questioned by progressives. In fact, it's difficult to listen to this and imagine he feels any way about them other than contemptuous. Like he's the one who's running the party, and they're just a bunch of annoying hanger-ons who damn near cost him the election with their defund the police talk. I mean, the way he talks.
A lot to respond to here. Let's get something straight. You shouldn't be disappointed. What I've done so far is more than anybody else has done this far.
The fuck have you done? You haven't been inaugurated yet. You haven't been inaugurated yet. You mean during your vice presidency? Do you really want to make the claim you've done more than anybody else? The actual semantics of what he's saying isn't relevant because obviously what he's saying is fucking nonsense. No progressive was talking about Charlottesville. You fucking kidding me? That's obviously not true. No, what matters here is the attitude. And the attitude is the attitude that I told you guys he was going to have, that I told you guys you forgot about his crime bill. Anybody who's in chat right now who thinks I'm surprised by Biden's behavior here hasn't been watching my channel at all, okay? I'm not surprised by any of this. You think I thought Biden would stroll in here and be an ally to progressives? The fuck? Do you watch my content? No. The election's done. Well, the Georgia stuff still has to happen, and then we have the inauguration, but the presidential election is done, and now we're in a position where we're fighting for the soul of the Democratic Party. And we have to make sure, even if we don't win, that we don't lose as hard as we have in the past. Because Biden is not our ally. Biden is and will continue to be contemptuous of our efforts to improve the planet. Sometimes, by the way, the cry of the moderate is legitimate. After all, when I say to Bernie or Busters that tactically electing Biden is preferable to allowing Trump to win, I am kind of sort of making a cry to moderate, pragmatism. Though I can defend the legitimacy of my arguments, I will, and I have many times, that is essentially what I am doing. But I do not believe the arguments that Biden is making here, to the extent that this could even be considered a fucking argument, are legitimate. I think he thinks it's his party now. And I think he and Pelosi and Schumer and Feinstein, all these other very deeply rooted, very establishment, generally quite old Democrats, probably don't think very much of us. There's a reason why the average age of a Democrat politician is 20 years older than that of a Republican politician. They let their kids win, Us Democrats, we keep people in office for 40 fucking years. And it's not surprising they would be contemptuous of all these activists and protesters coming up to them. But we should remember every single negative word spoken by Biden to those activists mirrors language spoken 60 years ago. Civil rights activists also spoke with Democratic and Republican politicians back in the day. And when they did, they were met with the same exact retorts that the time was not yet right for progressive movement, that the electoral consequences would be too severe, that actually the moderates were doing everything in their power, and sometimes, marginally, those arguments were true. Politics is complicated. You can't throw your whole hand out there all at once. But often, most often, I would argue, they were merely establishment politicians who weren't willing to cede their power to younger and more radical forces. And that is the war we will be fighting for the next 4 years. Fighting heart by heart, mind by mind, for every Democrat we can get, pointing them to shit like this and asking them if they really feel comfortable with progressivism in this country being dictated, or the pace of its implementation being dictated, by a man who says that the progressives did nothing and said nothing after Charlottesville. Is that really the person who you want representing the progressive wing of the Democratic Party? Is that really the forefront of the rights movement? I don't think so. I think we can do better, and I think we should do better. And we're getting really goddamn close to that inauguration, and the Republicans are still going to be a threat after that inauguration. I'm going to continue to shit on the Republicans, and I will continue to point out the true fact, the correct fact, that Democrats, even Democrats like Biden, are significantly better than Republicans, and that is true, and that is a fact, and I'll have that argument any day. But that don't make the Democrats good. We can do better. Besides, being a socialist in the modern world has always been a war against essentially all of the political parties of the country that you live in. So let us continue in that venerable tradition by directing antagonism, tactical antagonism, well-managed, mated, pragmatic antagonism to everyone who deserves it, okay? For the legacy of our forefathers, okay?